The generator coughed once, shuddered against the frozen dirt, and died. Mara Yellowtail struck the metal casing with the heel of her hand. Come on. The wind drove rain beneath the barn door and across the concrete floor. Every heater in sea had gone dark. The temperature gauges were already falling one red digit at a time, while 320 turkey eggs sat in rows beneath blankets and lantern light. 96 degrees, 95.7, 95.3. Mara could hear Luke behind her dragging another propane cylinder from the equipment shed. Aunt Lena moved between the trays with jars of heated water wrapped in towels. Noah Birdinground knelt beside the breaker box holding a flashlight between his teeth while he tested wires with numb fingers. Fuel lines clogged, Luke shouted over the wind. Mara dropped to her knees beside the generator. Mud soaked through her jeans. Her braid slapped against her shoulder as she pulled the cover loose. How long has the power been out? Noah asked. I don't know. You checked at midnight. Yes, and it was holding 99.1. He glanced toward the nearest gauge. 94.8. Mara forced her hands to slow. Panic made tools slip. Panic stripped screws and broke things that could still be repaired. Inside the barn, something fragile tapped faintly against a shell. Or perhaps she only imagined it. 14 days earlier, those same eggs had been stacked beside a loading bay outside Hardin, waiting for a landfill truck. Wade Mercer had not even looked up when he ordered them thrown away. Toss them, he told one of the hatchery workers. They're too old to set commercially. Mara had gone there to price 20 chicks. 20 was all she thought she could afford, though the truth was she could not afford those either. She had $11 in her checking account, a feed bill 2 months late, and a foreclosure notice folded inside the glove compartment of her truck. The Yellowtail Ranch had survived 4 generations of hard winters, dry summers, and markets that rose and fell without caring who they buried. But 2 bad seasons had nearly finished what weather and debt had failed to do for decades. A late frost killed most of the alfalfa. Then grasshoppers came across the south pasture in such numbers that the ground seemed to move. The sheep went into fall thin. Lamb weights dropped. Mara borrowed against the land to buy hay and spent the winter pretending she could not hear the clock ticking inside. Every bank envelope. Wade noticed her staring at the pallet. Fertile heritage bronze, he said. Collected over 3 weeks. Storage temperature wasn't consistent. Nobody wants them now. What happens to them? Landfill Tuesday. Mara studied the brown cartons. Her grandmother had kept bronze turkeys when Mara was little. She remembered their dark feathers shining green and copper beneath the sun, their long steps through grass, the way they chased insects around the sheep pens. I'll take them. Wade finally looked at her. His eyes moved from her cracked boots to her broad hips, her sweat-darkened shirt and the old truck visible through the loading door. His expression settled into something between amusement and pity. You'd need a controlled room stable, heat, humidity, turning schedules, backup power. You might hatch 20, you might hatch none, then you won't lose anything by giving them to me? He laughed. Lady, those eggs are garbage. Mara held his gaze. They are only garbage if we leave them where somebody else decided they should die. The room went quiet. Wade stopped smiling. He made her sign a release. No refunds, no guarantees, no responsibility if the eggs spoiled, failed, or burned down her barn. No one helped her load them. Mara carried each carton herself. Her thighs trembled by the end, but her hands remained gentle. She placed every egg in the truck bed as though it already contained a heartbeat. Luke was repairing a stock water pump when she came home. He lifted the tarp, stared at the cartons, then looked at her. We don't have a turkey operation. We might. We don't have an incubator. We have Grandpa's dairy barn. He was silent for a long moment. How old are they? Collected over about 3 weeks. Some stored wrong. So we could hatch 200. Yes. Or 0. Yes. He looked toward the south pasture where grasshoppers jumped ahead of the sheep's hooves. What do you need me to do? They worked until after dark. The dairy barn had not held cattle since before their father died. It smelled of old timber dust, motor oil, and the faint sweetness of hay trapped in the walls. They hauled out rusted equipment, swept the floor, patched gaps around the windows, and arranged wooden pallets beneath 3 salvaged heaters. Aunt Lena arrived carrying beef stew-fry bread wrapped in cloth and a weathered notebook. She turned one egg beneath the light and smiled without showing much of it. Your grandmother kept this breed, I remember. No, you remember following them. That isn't the same as remembering what they did. Mara checked the thermometer. 98.6. Lena placed the notebook on the workbench. She wrote down everything, what they ate, where they foraged, how they followed the sheep. She believed somebody would need it after she was gone. I need birds I can sell, Auntie. Not stories. Lena did not argue. She uncovered the stew and began filling bowls. Word spread anyway. Harlan Cole called to warn Mara that desperate people often confused risk with opportunity. His son Coulter posted online that turkeys did not hatch from wishes. Wade called twice to remind her that the release protected the hatchery. Mara deleted every message. 3 times a day she and Luke turned the eggs by hand. On the 5th morning, they candled 20. The first was clear. The second showed a blood ring. The third was dark, but still. Mara felt something inside her closing. Then Luke lifted the 4th egg. Tiny veins spread through the shell like red lightning. At the center something moved. They checked the rest. 15 showed life. Luke smiled. "Don't," Mara said. "Don't what start believing." His smile faded. "Fear makes people careless too." She took the next egg from his hand and returned to work. Noah came that afternoon to inspect the wiring. After one heater began flickering. He had grown up 3 roads over and returned to Pryor after years away studying range management. He found a loose connection, replaced part of the line, and warned them that the barn's old circuits were carrying too much load. "You need backup power. The generator runs. You tested it." Luke and Mara exchanged a look. Noah exhaled through his nose. They tested it the next morning. It started on the 4th pull. That had seemed good enough. Now in the storm, the machine lay silent beneath Mara's hands. "Try it," Luke said. She cleared the fuel line, tightened the cover, and pulled. Nothing. Again. The generator coughed. Noah shouted from inside. "North section's below 94. Mara pulled until pain tore through her shoulder. The engine started sputtered and nearly died. She gripped the frame with both hands. "Stay with me." The motor steadied. Luke connected the cable. One heater came alive, then another. Warm air began moving through the barn. Nobody spoke. By dawn, the storm had passed. Wet clouds dragged east across the Pryor Mountains, leaving the ranch under a pale, exhausted sky. The gauges climbed back toward 99. But heat returning did not mean life had remained. Noah carried the flashlight to the coldest section. Mara stood beside him while Luke and Lena waited near the workbench. The first egg showed nothing. The second was dark and still. The third had no visible movement. Mara felt the barn narrowing around her. Noah lifted the 4th egg. For several seconds there was only darkness inside the shell. Then something shifted. A small body turned beneath the light. Mara leaned closer. From somewhere inside the egg came a faint, stubborn tap. Once. Then again. The tapping came again, soft, uneven, alive. Mara pressed 2 fingers against the shell as though she might feel the tiny body through it. Noah held the flashlight steady while Luke and Aunt Lena watched from the workbench. "How many more?" Luke asked. Noah lowered the egg. "We need to check every tray." They worked until the morning light turned white against the barn windows. 19 embryos were gone. Some eggs were clear and light. Others held dark shapes that no longer moved. Mara placed each failed egg in a wooden box beneath the workbench. She did not throw them away. Luke watched her lift the lid. "You don't have to do all of that now. The others still need turning." "Mara," she closed the box. "The others still need turning." No one tried to stop her. For the next 11 days, Mara slept on a narrow cot beside the incubating trays. She woke at every change in the heater's hum. She recorded temperature, humidity movement, and loss in columns, so tight they seemed carved rather than written. Her back hurt from bending over the trays. Her broad hands grew dry and cracked. Some mornings her braid remained half-finished because she had heard a heater stutter and run to the barn before tying it. Aunt Lena brought food. Noah checked the wiring. Luke stayed more often than he returned to Hardin. The barn became a second house, warmer and louder than the first, filled with the smell of wood dust, propane, and possibility. On the 22nd day, Luke found Mara calculating at the workbench. 80 birds at $45, she murmured. "That covers feed and part of the payment. 150. You told me not to count." "I'm not counting. I'm preparing. That's counting with a harder face." She put down the pencil. "What do you want from me? I want you to admit this might work. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. That easy for you." His expression changed. "No, it isn't." Mara looked away. Luke leaned both hands against the workbench. "You think I stayed in Hardin because I didn't care what happened here. You weren't here. I wasn't here because every time I came home I saw Dad's chair empty and the south pasture dying, and you acting like needing help was some kind of moral failure. I didn't ask you to leave. You never asked me to stay." The barn seemed suddenly too hot. Mara folded her arms across her chest. "Needing people gives them the power to leave." Luke's voice softened. "They can leave whether you need them or not. That is not a reason to carry everything alone." Before she could answer, a vehicle came fast up the gravel drive. Coulter Cole stepped from a polished black truck wearing a clean jacket and the expression of a man arriving somewhere he already considered partly his. He looked toward the barn. "So they're still alive," Mara said. "That's something." His tone made the words smaller. Aunt Lena came through the barn door carrying a pan covered with a dish towel. She took one look at Coulter and stopped. "What do you want?" Mara asked. Coulter shoved his hands into his pockets. "Dad and I have been talking. If the bank pushes forward, we'd be willing to buy the south pasture before foreclosure, save you the public mess. The land isn't for sale. I'm trying to help. You came here before the eggs have even hatched to ask what part of my ranch you can take." His jaw tightened. "You're desperate, Mara. Desperate people sometimes need someone to say what everybody else is thinking." Aunt Lena placed the pan on the workbench. "Do not call her desperate when what you mean is that she refused to disappear quietly." Coulter stared at her. Lena's voice remained calm. "You came here because you expected the bank to make her small enough for you to step over. That's not fair." "No," Mara said. "It's accurate." She walked toward him until he had to either hold his ground or retreat. He retreated half a step. "This ranch is not for sale. Not the south pasture, not the creek section, not one fence post. The next time you come here without calling, I'll have you removed." Coulter looked from Mara to Luke, then to Noah. No one moved to soften the moment. He left with gravel spitting behind his tires. Mara stood in the doorway until the truck disappeared. Only then did her hands begin to shake. Aunt Lena touched her elbow once. "Come inside," she said. Mara shook her head. "There's work." 3 mornings later, she found the first crack. It was no wider than a pencil mark at the pointed end of an egg in the northeast tray. Mara almost missed it. She lifted the egg and heard a faint scraping from within. Luke. He crossed the barn in 4 strides. Noah looked up from the temperature log. Lena set down the feed pan she had been cleaning. The crack widened slowly. For hours, the poult worked against the shell. Mara watched the tiny beak appear and disappear. Once the movement stopped for nearly 40 minutes. "I should help," she whispered. "No," Lena said. "It's stuck. Maybe it's resting. What if it dies while we wait?" Lena looked at her. "What if you kill it, because waiting frightens you?" Mara clenched her hands and did nothing. Near noon, the shell began breaking in a crooked circle. A small section lifted. Then the top came free. The poult collapsed forward, wet and dark, its body trembling with effort. Mara did not breathe until it did. The bird raised its head, its eyes opened. "You made it," she said. Luke came beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He saw the tears she had not wiped away and set 1 cup within reach. The second poult hatched before sunset. By morning there were 7. By the following night, 19. The barn filled with peeping so sharp and constant that Mara heard it even when she stepped outside. Not every egg opened. Some pipped and went silent. 1 weak poult died in Mara's hands after she helped remove part of the shell. She sat on the cot with the small body wrapped in a cloth, convinced she had moved too soon. "You were trying to save it," Noah said. "I killed it. You don't know that. I touched the shell." Compassion doesn't give you control over the ending. She looked at him, angry because the words were true. That evening, Luke dropped an egg. The shell broke against the concrete. He stood over it with his face drained of color. "I'm sorry," he said. "Mara, I'm so sorry." She looked at the dark stain, then at her brother. It was 1 life. It mattered. But the others still need your hands. Luke swallowed. Then he returned to the trays. The hatching continued for 3 days. The last poult arrived late, smaller than the rest. It lay still long enough for Mara to think it had failed. Then it pushed itself upright, took 3 shaking steps, and joined the warm cluster beneath the lamp. They counted the birds once. 236. They counted again. 237. Noah ran the numbers. 74%. Luke sat down hard on an overturned bucket. Lena closed her eyes. Mara looked over the crowded brooder. "Now we raise them." The work became heavier. Feed disappeared faster than expected. Heat lamps failed. 2 poults weakened and died. Bedding had to be changed constantly. Luke began sleeping in the spare room and claimed the drive from Hardin wasted fuel. Mara did not argue. By 8 weeks, the surviving birds were fully feathered. Noah had built temporary fencing across the south pasture. The bank's November deadline remained fixed, and the few early toms Mara sold barely touched the debt. On the first cold morning of October, Mara opened the mobile pen. The flock stood packed in the doorway. One bronze hen stepped into the grass. Wind moved across the pasture. She retreated, then stepped forward again. A grasshopper jumped near her feet. The hen struck and swallowed it. The rest of the flock poured from the pen. Bronze wings opened beneath the pale sky. Birds spread across the damaged ground, scratching, hunting, calling to one another as the Pryor Mountains watched from the west. Aunt Lena opened the old notebook. "The birds will show you what the land is missing," she read. Noah returned 4 days later with the first measurements. Grasshopper numbers were falling. The hard surface soil had begun to loosen. Mara stared across the pasture at the moving flock. Then she heard a truck stop at the fence. Harlan Cole stepped out slowly, removed his hat, and looked at land that no longer appeared ready to die. Harlan Cole stood beside his truck with his hat in one hand and his eyes fixed on the south pasture. The turkeys had been working the ground for 11 days. Nothing looked miraculous. The grass was still autumn brown. Dust still clung to the fence posts. The sheep still moved slowly through country shaped by drought. But the pasture no longer seemed dead. The bronze birds crossed it in shifting lines, scratching open the hard surface, hunting beneath weeds, following every grasshopper that broke cover. Their manure lay scattered in small dark patches. Where their feet had disturbed the crust, the soil looked softer. Harlan stepped through the gate. "How long?" he asked. 11 days, Mara said. He crouched near a bare patch and pressed 2 fingers into the dirt. The ground gave beneath them. This section was hard as fired clay in August. "I know." Noah opened his field notebook. Grasshopper density is down 38% from the baseline sweep, higher in the western strip. Harlan looked toward the flock. "I spent $4,000 on treatments this year." Mara said nothing. "My east pasture still lost grass. Chemicals kill more than grasshoppers. I know that now." His voice carried no defense. That made Mara look at him. Harlan rubbed the soil between his fingers. "My grandmother kept turkeys. Not this many, maybe 20. She turned them loose behind the sheep. Aunt Lena remembers. My father got rid of them, said they grew too slowly, said there were cleaner ways to manage insects." A bronze hen darted beneath the fence rail and snapped up something hidden near his boot. Mara watched the bird swallow. The land had not forgotten what the people had. Harlan remained crouched for a moment. Then he stood. "I want to borrow 30. Mara folded her arms. "For what, my east section? 8 weeks, maybe longer. Whatever you think it needs. You came here to ask, yes, not tell me what I should do." The corner of his mouth shifted, though it did not become a smile. "I believe I've done enough of that." Mara laid out her terms. The birds remained hers. Harlan would provide water, supplemental feed, and predator protection. Noah would measure the pasture before and after. The flock would move in sections so no part of the ground was overworked. Harlan agreed to all of it. They shook hands beside the fence. His grip was firm, but the moment carried none of the authority he usually brought onto other people's land. It felt like what it was, one rancher asking another for knowledge. By the end of October, Harlan's east pasture showed the same early changes. Grasshopper counts fell. The surface crust loosened. Sheep that had avoided the section began grazing it again. Mara did not celebrate. She wrote down the numbers. November came cold. At 4:30 on market morning, she loaded 94 mature toms into the livestock trailer and drove toward Hardin beneath a sky still black enough to hide the mountains. 40 birds had been promised to a specialty butcher. The rest were divided among 2 restaurants, local families, and a farm market that had sold out of advance orders in 9 days. The final delivery ended shortly after 3. Mara sat in her truck outside the bank and calculated the numbers twice. After processing fuel and feed costs, the birds had earned enough to make the overdue loan payment, bring the feed account current, and leave money for winter. She stared at the total until the ink blurred. For 2 years she had imagined losing the ranch in exact detail. The bank notice, the auction, Coulter Cole walking her south pasture as though it had always belonged to him. She had never allowed herself to imagine this. Mara lowered her forehead to the steering wheel and cried for 4 quiet minutes. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve, carried the payment inside, and drove home. Luke waited on the porch with 2 cold beers. How much, he asked. She told him. He looked toward the pasture, then back at her. Net. He handed her a bottle. "The butcher wants 200 birds next year," she said. Luke took a long drink. "Sounds like you'll need a full-time equipment manager. You know one." "I might." That was how Luke told her he was staying. She nodded once. "All right." Wade Mercer arrived 3 weeks later in a clean truck with a folder tucked beneath his arm. He sat at Mara's kitchen table while Lena poured coffee and Luke leaned against the counter. Wade proposed a surplus egg program. The hatchery would send unwanted fertile eggs to small farms instead of paying to discard them. In return, the farms would provide hatch records and photographs the hatchery could use publicly. Who chooses the farms? Mara asked. We would? No. Wade blinked. It's our inventory. It was your garbage until I proved it wasn't. His jaw tightened. Mara continued. There will be a community committee, ranchers, tribal land people, hatchery staff, and somebody who understands incubation. The records stay public. The farms get credit for their work. And I'm a partner in the program, not the woman you hand eggs to when you want a good photograph. You're making this difficult. You found me easy to dismiss when you thought I had nothing. That was your mistake, not my obligation. Wade looked at Luke, then Lena, perhaps hoping for a softer answer. Neither offered one. He opened the folder again. All right, he said. I'll take the committee structure to the board. Coulter came alone the following week. He parked near the house in an ordinary truck and approached with his hat in his hands. I owe you an apology. Mara waited. The post, the offer for your pasture, all of it. You thought I was going to fail. I wanted you to. His honesty surprised her. Coulter looked toward the flock. If you succeeded, then I had to admit I didn't understand as much as I thought I did. An apology is a start, I know. What you do afterward matters more. He nodded. When Harlan later asked Coulter to help manage the borrowed flock, Mara allowed Noah to train him. The first community meeting took place in the back room of the Pryor feed store. Mara expected 8 people. 23 arrived. Ranchers stood along the walls when the folding chairs ran out. Lena brought beef stew and fry bread. Luke carried the incubation records. Noah spread soil reports across a table. Wade sat near the back, silent and attentive. Mara stood before them. These birds are not a miracle, she said. They require heat, clean water, feed fencing records, and people willing to notice problems before they become disasters. Some eggs will die. Some birds will die. If you are looking for an easy answer, this is not one. No one left. 5 farms entered the first program. By spring, discarded eggs had produced hundreds of poults across the county. Noah's measurements showed lower grasshopper density, improved soil structure, and better forage. University researchers came with sweep nets and soil probes. When the study was published, Mara's name appeared beside theirs. Lena placed the printed paper beside grandmother's old notebook on the kitchen table. Different words, the same truth. 2 years after the hatchery, Mara stood at the south pasture fence beneath an October ski. The ranch was not rich. It was alive. The loan balance had fallen. Sheep weights had improved. Luke lived in the spare room. The breeding flock produced its own strong young birds. 14 farms now participated in the surplus program. Mara remained the same broad-bodied woman who had loaded the eggs alone while men watched. Her worth had not changed. Only the number of people capable of seeing it had. Luke called from the house that dinner was ready. Aunt Lena's truck sat beside the porch. Noah had left the latest soil report beneath a stone on the fence post. Warm light filled the kitchen window. Mara watched the bronze hens settle into the grass they had helped restore. What everyone else had thrown away had not needed a miracle. It had needed a place to live, hands willing to work, and one woman stubborn enough to look twice.